Oh boy, we're in.
Hello.
You got Wild Heart up in here?
I was enjoying that.
What's going on, man?
What you do? How's it going?
Yeah, it's kind of nice. Huh?
What's going on?
What's going on with you, man? I haven't seen you in a while.
Yeah. Yeah, life got in the way. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. What you got going on?
Not a lot. I've been ill rather recently, so I'm off the sauce, if you know what I mean. But we don't have to get into that. Yeah.
You're off the sauce?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. That's the Wild Heart I like to talk to.
Yeah.
Good.
Medical issues got in the way.
Okay. Liver said no.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Well, that's the way it's got to be to stop you. I guess just going to have to go with it, right?
Yeah. It's actually made it incredibly easy. Yeah.
You had a switch flip on when that happened?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, just stopped immediately. Yeah.
That's cool.
But anyway, I did have a topic I wanted to discuss.
Yeah.
So you're a presup, right?
We're all presuppers. We all have presuppositions.
That is true.
Most people don't like to talk about theirs. So I like
Yeah.
to focus on that category because I think that's where people's true philosophies are hiding.
Yeah, I agree with that actually. Yeah. But what I was wondering is, like I presuppose like the laws of logic, because you kind of have to. You don't have a choice about that.
Immaterial, abstract concepts.
Yeah, mathematics.
So if you were a materialist or a physicalist, right away you would have a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Numbers exist.
Well, that's an interesting topic for you to talk about with some of your friends, because you've got friends who are materialists and physicalists. You can get them to agree to that and say, well, how can you account for that immaterial abstraction that you're bringing in to reality, right? They have a prior commitment to that, and they can't even account for it. So it's an interesting conversation you can have with people. Just on a side note.
Yeah, I've never seen it as a problem. I mean, obviously, once you have a mind, then you have concepts like numbers, that kind of thing are a concept. So, and it's immaterial. So I've never seen a.
Well, I'm saying that you have people that you know that are materialists or physicalists.
All right.
You could bring that to their attention without, I mean, you don't have to get into an extensive argument. You can just ask them, how do you account for that?
Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't understand that line of reason. I suppose I don't ask the people I know whether they're materialists or not enough, because I don't know who is and who isn't. You know what I mean? But yeah, it's a good point.
Oh yeah, go on.
Yeah. So my point was, like, to my understanding, you should only presuppose what is absolutely necessary to presuppose. And I don't know how you get to God and the Bible is true. I don't know how you get to include them as presuppositions.
Well, what did you just say before that? You said you have a philosophy that you should only presuppose the minimal, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you've got a philosophy in place there. So right away, you've put yourself in a position where you can be questioned as to how you got there. You see how this is how the presupposition conversations work. Once you make a counter opinion,
Yeah,
now you got a burden on you to explain how you got there and how you came to that conclusion. It's going to be difficult for you. We're going to have to trace back your ultimate presupposition.
Yeah, I'll try to explain it the best I can. Basically, we all need presuppositions, but like everything else that you can get, if you can get to something through evidence, you should do. And I know we all need presuppositions, but
you've got another philosophy there where you're bringing in. I think you're bringing in empiricism.
Yeah, not necessarily empiricism,
not necessarily right.
Arguments, and evidence. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right. So when we go back to the conceptual abstractions like the laws of logic,
yeah,
this is where it's a good area for you to explore, because I think we've touched on this before, is you don't really have evidence of these abstractions. You have examples, you have demonstrations that you can make with the alleged abstractions that are allegedly real, but you don't actually have evidence of the thing themselves. Themselves.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You necessarily, like the axioms, and
that's another problem too. Calling things axioms is not necessarily going to work, because what you think is self-evident, I may disagree with, and that's also problematic. We can both agree on utilizing the classical laws of logic, and we can agree that we presuppose them. But when you get into axioms, you can't assume that everyone has the same self-evident perception that you have.
Yeah.
Sorry to keep stopping you, but it's just the nature of these conversations, because people tend to slip in things that they don't realize they're just assuming, and it's worth stopping and clarifying, because otherwise you're smuggling and stuff that's going to eventually come up later, and then we're going to have to go back to it. But you can continue.
Yeah, no, what I was trying to say is, like, your presuppositions, I'm kind of calling them bad. It's not good that you have to have presuppositions, but it's just a fact that you do.
Right.
So I'm saying on that basis, presuppositions are bad because you don't really want that.
But presuppositions are bad, you said?
Yeah, so you should have as few as possible, if you know what I mean.
Well, I guess you're looking at it like it's a degree of faith, because you can't. You're assuming something so fundamental that may not be empirical.
Yeah,
utilizing, so you want to have as little as possible of that thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. So, have you considered what your ultimate presupposition is, or do you have categories of presuppositions? Can you go beyond assuming logical laws and the utility of logic and language and mathematics, or is that where you hit a wall?
No, yeah, I think that's it. Laws of logic. I'm not sure whether I even presuppose like mathematics. I know an abstract construct like in my mind, but I'm not sure whether that makes them presuppositions. I know that they not exist, but you know what I mean.
Right. I think we refer to mathematics as absolutes and still conceptual abstractions because we can make demonstrations and utilize equations, but when we get into questions like where is the number 5, that's when it gets interesting. Again, with a materialist or physicalist, they say, well, the number 5 is in your head.
Yeah.
And you say, well, is the number 5 in your head identical to the number 5 in my head? Is it the same molecules? And they can't answer in the affirmative, can they?
No, it wouldn't be the same molecules, but it would be the same concepts.
Right. So that's
If you
again,
had, sorry.
yeah, you're snapping them out of materialism, though. You're showing them that we're
Yeah.
sharing something abstract and absolute that doesn't seem to exist in time and space or as material, so to speak.
Yeah, it's like if there was a universe and all that was in the universe was 5 rocks, but no minds, there would still be 5 rocks, but until you have a mind, the number 5 wouldn't exist.
Well, the thing about that is that you've got 5 things, 5 rocks, but the 5 is not identical with the collection of rocks or the set of rocks.
Yeah, that's a conceptual thing.
It's a little bit of a tricky concept. I've gone over it a few times, and sometimes it slips away from me. But the 5 is just a demonstration through a physical item: rocks, coconuts, bananas. 5 of something. I got into this a little bit with Aaron Raw in a comment chat, and he was kind of going in the same direction. He was saying, "Oh, it's the 5 rocks." I think he was using bananas, or I set him up with bananas to kind of imply the whole ape thing, which is cool.
Yeah, their comfort thing.
He's saying the five bananas exist, and then we count them, and then they're 5. And he can bring them to the conceptual idea, at least not in the side chat. But
yeah,
maybe I'll talk to him about it sometime. But these seem to be conceptual universals that we discover, and then we are able to put into demonstrations and equations and symbolism. And
but again,
rockets and engines with these equations. They're incredible things, and we see them in nature too, right? The golden ratio in seashells, Fibonacci sequence, and flowers and so forth. Yeah, go ahead.
But again, if we discover them, then that makes them not presuppositions. If we have to discover them, so again, I don't think they will count as presuppositions.
Well, yeah, it gets a little bit tricky for me when we bring in mathematics versus presupposing logical laws in language. So if we want to stay with logic, we can stay there. I think that's actually where we left off last time. We kind of got to the wall. You assume the classical laws of logic, identity, excluded middle, non-contradiction, and they just are. You presuppose them. They're, as far as you know, they're immaterial, invariant abstractions, and you presuppose them in your life. You use them to think, use them to speak, and that's as far back as you go.
Yeah, that's it. As far as I know, those are the only presuppositions that I have.
So what the believer does here is says, well, the difference in my belief and your belief is I have the ultimate presupposition of belief in the Christian God. And that gives me justification for the utility of these abstractions.
I think that's where we're going to differ.
Right.
You need justification for the laws of logic. I don't. I think they're just brute facts.
Right, but
this. You know what I mean? They couldn't be any other way.
Right, but this is where it gets problematic for you potentially, in my understanding, because for you to just take a position like that is going to break logic. You're going to go into arbitrariness, which is going to lead you into ad hoc positioning of explanation. You're just saying it just is.
I don't think that's arbitrary.
Well,
I think they couldn't be any other way.
that's
And I know precepts like to use the phrase impossibility of the contrary. And
right.
I think that's what the laws of logic. Like, can you imagine a universe, or can you imagine anything where a thing is not the thing it is?
Well, that's an interesting concept in itself. Yeah, that's an interesting concept in itself, because when I think the thing is the thing, wild heart is wild heart, you're a physical being that's in flux. The tree is the tree. It loses leaves, it loses branches in the wind, it gains moisture in the rain. So the tree seems to be ever changing too, which is the identity over time problem. So it's not quite that simple. Yeah. The thing is it sounds like you've got an appeal to incredulity there, potentially.
No, I think the thing is, like, if you take it like in time, like, a thing is the thing it is. In that second of time, I am me. Like, if you just take 1 second at a time.
Well, even a millisecond.
Yeah.
But the thing is time is not stagnant, so the theory keeps breaking.
Yeah, but in the second of time that you're saying it, I am me now.
In that second is gone. The second is gone now. You see, though, it's
but you boil it down. But you know the point I'm trying to get across. If you boil it down to like the Planck time or whatever, the smallest amount of time you can get.
The
statement is true. It's like definitionally true. In that moment of time, I am the thing that I am.
Wild heart was wild heart. That's the way I look at that. You're saying wild heart is wild heart, and I'm conceptually saying wild heart was wild heart.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah,
but maybe that's why you want to refer to more of what you think is objective truths that are invariant, like mathematics. You don't have that same change over time as you do with the empirical and material world. Like you're changing, tree is changing, the elements are changing, but when we go to the conceptual abstractions, we don't see change there.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. There is some kind of problem, but I think it's possibly just a problem with language rather than an actual problem. Do you know what I mean? It's difficult to describe, but that doesn't make it an actual problem with the.
Possibly, but can you actually? Are you saying you can conceptualize the idea? You just can't put it into words?
Yeah, like obviously it takes time to say a sentence. So if I say I am Wildheart in this moment, by the time I finish saying in this moment, I've already changed. I get what you're saying, but I think that's more like if you could freeze time, the statement would be true. If you could freeze time, so time wasn't going on, then the statement would be true. I am Wildheart in this moment, and I am not Wildheart. If you know what I mean.
Yeah, but see, that's the thing about this reality and existence. Like, if we could just freeze it, then it would be true. Like that sounds kind of funny.
Yeah,
if we could just freeze time, it would be true. So, this is an issue of identity over time, which I haven't actually looked into that much, but it's on the list of things to do. It's just one of the things we assume, like identity over time, induction, uniformity of nature. We assume those philosophies and bring them into the sciences when we do experimentation. And that's another thing that a lot of atheists or materialists overlook. They say, I pay attention to science. I focus on science. And they don't even realize the philosophy of science. It relies on things that they can't account for. Well, of course, depending on their worldview, this is where we go back to the Christian worldview versus the secular worldview. You can't account for these philosophies, whereas the believer says, I can account for them because we see the realities written within the scriptures.
Yeah, but that's my main problem. Like I say, you should presuppose as few things as possible and you're saying you have to justify the laws of logic. I don't agree. I don't think you have to justify them.
Right. So you would have to have a basis for justifying that claim. That's the problem.
Yeah, I think they're just. I don't want to keep repeating myself, but I'll not use.
Well, what I'm saying is,
it couldn't be like if I take your view. I presume that you think that God couldn't be any other way, or do you?
I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't know that. I think of God as sovereign, so I wouldn't say he couldn't be any other way. He is what he is.
But why couldn't I use that same argument for the laws of logic?
Because the atheist can't get away with borrowing God. Ultimately, is the problem. This is
just because we have the same view on something doesn't mean I'm borrowing.
No, that's essentially what you're trying to do. You're trying to borrow the argument.
No, just because you said it first doesn't mean that I'm borrowing. Like you believe that something is the way it is, and I'm saying I believe something is the way it is as well. I'm just saying the laws of logic are the way they are, and they don't need justification.
Right. In argumentation,
you're saying the same thing for God. So what?
No, well, in argumentation, this is where this goes. In argumentation of this sort, we're gonna go into a justification of why you're able to say something. If you can't justify it, then you've hit a wall in philosophy, which is fine. You can stand in that wall and say it just is. I can't see it any other way. But the Christian is saying no, I can justify that presupposition that we agree on. So you see it maybe as an extra step, and I see it as a necessary step.
Right. So how would you justify God?
You don't justify God.
That's what I'm saying. You're saying exactly the same thing as I am. You're just adding a God.
No, it's not an addition. It's a necessity.
But you just said if you can't justify something, then you hit a wall. Then I asked you how you justify God, and you said I don't need to.
Right, but the argument is that's true. That's true. I see what you're saying. The argument is a transcendental argument for God, that the Christian God provides the necessary preconditions for absolutes, including morality, including logic, which we use. You don't have the same justification there, and it does come down to ultimately it's going to be circular. Like it's going to refer to itself, whereas your justification for the laws of logic refer to themselves. You check your logic with logic, but you got a different justification or lack of, which is it just is. So that's basically the fundamental difference.
But I mean, I know I said this, but you're criticizing me for not having a justification for the laws of logic. And then I ask you to justify God, and you're saying I don't have a justification. He doesn't need one. I don't understand how you can get away with it, and I can't.
Right. I know what you mean there. What I'm saying is the transcendental argument for God is that the Christian God provides the necessary preconditions for logic. So it's a different argument than your traditional inductive arguments, where you're.
So why can't I say the laws of logic? What did you say?
Are the necessary preconditions?
Are the necessary preconditions for the laws of logic?
You can try. Yeah, you can try that. That's typically where a non-believer tries to go, but then you're going to get into problems with explanatory power or what you actually believe being in question.
All right, explain that to me then. What problems do I get into?
Well, like when someone says, like, "Oh, well, if it's going to come down to a borrow," essentially, like that's where the atheist wants to go. The atheist is convinced by, let's say, Matt Dillahunty's, Daniel Dennett's, Richard Dawkins, that anything the believer can do, they can do. Right? This is a sort of a mindset I've seen in the YouTube condition, basically, since I've experienced it. It's anything the believer can do, I can do. I can ultimately borrow if I need to. They're very confident.
But
I'm using extra words here, right?
Yeah, but if you can explain borrow to me, am I borrowing just because you said it first? Could we not have this? if I'd never talked to you before, but we both came up with the
Yeah, I
same.
mean, it's evident in this conversation that you've moved to borrow.
But
Because you didn't start with it. You're like, oh well, let me think about that. I can do that then. You even said it, but it's fine. It's fine. If you're saying if you're original with
when you're saying borrowing, it's like I'm stealing something, like I'm doing it dishonestly. All I'm saying is, yeah, you come up with a good idea, but I can't understand why that doesn't also work for my idea.
Yeah,
it's like sharing rather than borrowing. I think
okay.
that's what I've got a problem with.
Yeah.
If what you're saying also works for what I'm saying, then why can't I just kind of share that and that applies to my idea as well?
Yeah, interesting point. It's less antagonistic. Yeah, I can go with that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, the thing that I'd see commonly used here would be like, oh well, if you've got a God that's the necessary preconditions for these absolutes, these conceptual abstractions that we utilize, I'm just going to posit in a banana or a ham sandwich or a pixie and make the same argument, which is AKA the borrow. I'm not saying you're doing that, but typically that's what you see here. I say, oh, okay, well then I can just represent the same argument with the pixie. So to that, I just say, well, go on, go ahead. And then you've got other problems that obviously are going to come up when you try to do that.
Yeah, I'm just not sure what makes your argument primary with the borrowing thing. Do you know what I mean? It's like you're saying my argument is primary. I can use these rules, but you can't use them for your.
No,
argument.
you can't. I'm saying you can.
Yeah.
I'm actually saying you can. I welcome you to, but that's where you're going to run into other problems.
So what? Right. If we go back, so what are the problems I would run into?
Well, you got to at least try it if you want to work it out. I'm kind of giving you a lot right now.
Yeah. So you're saying that God doesn't need justification. He is the foundation of the laws of logic. So my view is just cut out God. The laws of logic don't need justification, and they are the foundation of laws and logic. So if we take my view, what problems would I run into from there on? If you know what I mean.
It's not really as much of a foundation as you're just saying, this is as far back as I can trace reality that I presuppose these immaterial invariant conceptual abstractions in my thinking, in my reasoning, in my language, but you're not really giving me an explanation of why they are. You're saying they just are.
But again, you're not giving a reason for why God. You're saying that God doesn't need a justification. That's exactly the same as what I'm doing.
No, it's not quite, because I'm not comparing. You're comparing the laws of logic with God now. I'm saying there is a reason for the laws of logic. I'm going a step beyond, which I think you're calling an extra step. I'm saying a necessary step.
So can you justify that, why the laws of logic need justification, but God doesn't? Can you justify that claim?
Well, God being the creator of all things, of all reality.
But that's just an assertion. Yes, you're asserting.
I realize this. It becomes circular on a fundamental level. It refers back to itself. God, the knowledge through the scriptures, through revelation, ultimately divine revelation, refers back to itself. So that's true that it's circular. You're in a similar way, we're circular even in presupposing logic, right? We check and verify each other's logic. We say, oh, that's a logical fallacy, or that's a contradiction. So it goes into a Agrippa's trilemma, or the Munchausen trilemma, where on a fundamental level you have circularity.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, like all presuppositions are necessarily circular. I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah.
If my presuppositions are the laws of logic, they are circular ultimately.
Right. So it comes down to maybe the presupposition, not all presuppositions being equal. Because like
Yeah.
I'm saying, if you want to bring in a pixie as the preconditions necessary for all reality, including logic, I'll hear you out. That's where the argument gets problematic for people, I think. But this is not the total reliance of the faith. It's not the transcendental argument for God. It's just one way to handle the atheist experience.
Yeah. I'm just not understanding. Like, you go to God and you say that he doesn't need justification, but he's somehow better than taking the laws of logic as a foundation because he created the universe without actually demonstrating that he created. Why should I believe you that God created?
What do you mean? What do you mean by demonstration? You're going into empiricism now.
Yeah, like if you give no reason why, you're just saying that God doesn't need justification, but he's better than taking the laws of logic because he created the universe, but you're giving absolutely no evidence for that.
Well, the evidence is the argument itself is the evidence.
So, yeah.
The thing about it is though the laws of logic as well, like you haven't demonstrated those. We've agreed on them. We've granted those to be part of reality, but you don't actually demonstrate those. The thing that is the law itself is never demonstrated. You utilize the concept.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, but I mean, that's a starting point that we agree on them. Where it goes further is that we don't agree on God.
Right.
So I'm saying in order for you to convince me about God.
No, this is not about convincing you, Matt.
Yeah.
That's how Matt Dillahunty puts people in his ballpark. He says, you need to convince me. That gives him an ever-moving goalpost. Because essentially when someone says, oh, that's fine, I'm reasonable, I'll listen to you, just convince me, they can change what they're convinced of at their will. And I'm not saying you're doing that even purposely. I'm just saying that's a game that I wouldn't play with somebody. Oh, you convince me. I'm saying that in my worldview, that we can utilize these very immaterial laws, and that my worldview provides a justification of the creation of these laws. So you're satisfied with saying, oh, I utilize these things and I have no idea why they exist or how they exist, but I'm okay with that. And I want you to prove God, but it's not quite working that way.
Yeah.
The argument is providing a philosophical foundation of why they exist.
I get what you're saying, but again, we both agree there is something that doesn't need to be justified. You're saying it's God. I'm saying it's the laws of logic. But you're criticizing me using the laws of logic because you need justification for them. But I'm criticizing God because you're saying you don't need a justification for God, but you do need a justification for the laws of logic.
Well, I'm not necessarily saying that you need to. I'm saying on my worldview, I do have justification for them.
All right. Yeah. So you just believe that.
It's a difference of the starting point, though. Like in argumentation, it becomes a problem because to say it just is, is not only circular, but it seems to be arbitrary as well. It seems to be a fundamental difference.
So why isn't God arbitrary? Did he choose his own nature? Did he choose? Did God or something else choose what God's nature would be? Because if they didn't, that would make God arbitrary as well.
Well, a sovereign God wouldn't be arbitrary by definition, but I guess you could try to push back on that.
Did he choose his own purposes? Did he choose that he was all good? Did he choose that he was all knowing? Or did something choose that he was?
Well, sovereignty implies that it's all his power, right? And then the idea in the scriptures that God transcends man's knowledge means that I don't have all the knowledge of those particulars. I could theorize about how God did this and that, but I wouldn't have all that knowledge.
Yeah. So you couldn't say that he wasn't arbitrary if you're saying you don't know how God got his properties.
Well, no, a sovereign God wouldn't be arbitrary. It would just be reasons that I don't understand or know, have knowledge of. I guess
Right.
somebody could claim they potentially have knowledge beyond that I don't. I mean, you could talk to Richard Madsen, maybe.
If you could explain sovereign, what about God being sovereign? If you could just explain what you mean by sovereign and how that would stop God being arbitrary, or necessitate that he wasn't arbitrary.
Well, you're trying to move your position into mine, right? You're trying to call me because I'm calling your position arbitrary. You're not denying it's arbitrary, but you're saying, well, the best case scenario now is I can prove that you also have an arbitrary position.
You're giving me way too much credit for thinking, no, I'm just working through this.
Well, I mean, I might be telling you what you're doing.
Yeah.
The thing about it is when you have the Christian God in place, providing the necessary preconditions for logic, I'm already in a position that's providing what we agree on as a fundamental presupposition, but I have an ultimate presupposition. That's what you don't have. You don't have an ultimate presupposition. So when you start questioning God, this is gonna be interesting too, because you're in your world, you have logic as your fundamental premise, but you don't have the epistemology or the ethics that are traditionally known in philosophy. You have metaphysics, ethics, and epistemology that are interrelated. You don't have the reasoning to connect those things to get into the why you know certain things, or how you can call my established philosophy wrong, either ethically or otherwise. Like those positions are going to be difficult. So I can always call you into question when you start getting into wanting to do a Bible study with me. That's why you have like a Seitan Bruggencate in his.
Oh yeah.
See how you saw his approach. Like he's not wrong though. He's just doing a blue collar approach where he says, I don't do Bible studies with atheists. He's got a point though. When you pull out a 2,000 page book and say, oh, here, you just go ahead and ask any question you want and I'll answer it. He's calling you into question. He's saying, well, wait a second. What is your starting point of what you can know and what you don't know? And that's another point too, because ultimately you'll say that you're not certain of anything, right?
But I suppose it depends on your goal of what you get from a Bible study. It's not necessarily one person asking another person questions. It's just trying to both people or however many people are just trying to understand the Bible more.
Yeah, that's true.
I get what you're saying, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, it depends on the circumstance, right? I think they're both utilized. Like I see Jill there in the chat. Like Jill is an evidentialist, right? He'll sit there with you guys for years and let you just throw anything at him, and he'll knock it down with his knowledge. And I give him props for doing that. It takes a lot of energy to try to do that, though. Think about it, though. Like, yeah,
it does take a lot of energy.
You guys got him in a circle of like 5-6 people, and you can just choose any part of the scripture you want and say, well, make sense out of that. Make sense out of that. And he's tasked to want to make sense out of it for you. Whereas the presuppositional approach says, well, wait a second. Where are you coming from fundamentally to be able to be even to question these things? You know, what is your sense of what you can know and what you can't know? And also, I think ethics and morality come into this, because ultimately when you're arguing with someone, you're essentially telling them that in one way or another that your point of view is correct or theirs is wrong. And this breaks down into ethics and morality as well. Not in all senses, but in a very large,
Yeah, that's another big point as well, because like with my presuppositions being the laws of logic and yours being God, ethics and morality don't really come into my presuppositions. Right. I don't think we get ethics and morality from the laws of logic. Oh,
well, that's a very interesting thing too, because that's one of the reasons I like to explore ethics and morality with secularists or subjective moralists, because I think that they inevitably are going to run into logical fallacies no matter which way they turn. Ultimately, they're going to start appealing to logical fallacies in their explanation.
Can you just say thanks, Christine Carpenter? I appreciate it, man. Good to see you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you might be right, but like my thing in morality, it's, you know, Matt Dillahunt, is basically we agree that morality is down to well-being. Then so it is subjective that we agree on that, but then you can get objective moral facts. So it's not strictly objective morality.
But isn't an objective what you're calling an objective just an agreement, which is moving into an ad populum? People that are having opinions or preferences, which is the subjective nature of it, saying, okay, let's agree on this and make an objective towards the goal. Isn't that moving already towards an ad populum?
No, it's subjective that you agree that well-being is the goal of morality. That's the only.
Actually, that's sorry.
No, you're fine.
That becomes an ad populum. You get two people agreeing, and then you get more, and now you've got a premise of what is, and that's only based on a preference of agreement. So you've got popularity there, popular agreement.
You know, it's saying it is subjective in that you have to agree. It's a subjective opinion that well-being should be the basis of morals. That is the subjective bit. But once you agree on that, then the objective part of it is like drinking battery acid is objectively bad if you want to, if the goal is well-being.
Right. I understand that, but what I'm saying is, like, you've got a group of 10 people, right?
Yeah.
So if you're gonna get, or you could take an island isn't always a good demonstration. Like, let's say 20 people crash on an island, like a Gilligan's Island scenario.
Yeah.
And you guys are saying, well, we got to make up some rules here. And everyone agrees, okay, well, we make the rules. It's our island. We're stuck here. So you got 20 people. And you would hope that more than 10 of them would agree that well-being is the goal. And we'll just say that they do. Let's say the majority, all of them, 20 of them agree that the well-being is the goal. Isn't that just conceptually a group of people agreeing on a premise, which is an ad populum decision? Isn't that what that is? Yeah,
it is kind of, but it's like practical. I mean, under my view, objective morality doesn't exist, so we kind of have to do the best we can. I mean, I know
it's a personal philosophy. I understand.
Yeah,
because for you to say it doesn't exist is one thing. About how you're exploring that, like, you've asked the first day I met you, I think, demonstrate it, which is typically an empirical claim, but you have better understanding now that you can demonstrate theories philosophically. Of course, you can make a demonstration of why, but so you don't think objective morality exists. So what I say to you, though, is any turn you make in subjective morality, you're going to encounter logical fallacies. And this is something I've been asking atheists on purpose, and I don't get a response from them. I say, do you allow for logical fallacies in your worldview? And they tend not to answer because it sounds like a trap, right? And it kind of is. Like if you say, hey, Wildheart, do you allow for logical fallacies in your worldview?
I would say, yeah. Again, going back to the laws of logic, I mean, it's like we said, no matter what your basis is, it's ultimately circular. And circular reasoning is always a logical fallacy. What I'm saying is we don't have a choice. So we've got to do the best we can. There are logical fallacies there, but there's nothing we can do about it.
It's going to be a huge problem if you think about this. I mean, I appreciate what you're saying, and I hear you. But if you're gonna say that logic is your fundamental presupposition, and that you can use logical fallacies, well, then you just open Pandora's box, really.
But you've done the same, saying that God is your basis and believing in God and the Bible is circular. You agreed to that before. Yeah.
I understand that it is on a fundamental level or paradigmatic level that the sovereign God and the belief in him and as the ultimate presupposition does circle back to him, and that we do check logic. We do check logic. Yeah.
Which is circular reasoning, which means that your worldview also necessarily contains a logical flaw, a fallacy.
So if we start to say, well, like you answered, yeah, I allow for logical fallacies, and you made the example, that's good. So when we start saying where we can't make them and where we can make them, what are we going to be appealing to then?
No, I would just say, again, just use as few of them as you can. They might be necessary. It might be necessary for you to have logical flaws in your philosophy or whatever, but just try to identify them where you can and cut them out where you can. But it's not always good. But it's not always possible. Do you know what I mean?
Sounds good, sounds practical, but still what comes into question is that philosophy itself, how you got there, because there can be another person. And keep this in mind when you have a subjective moral system that someone says, you know what, that sounds reasonable, that sounds practical and pragmatic, but on our island, which is adjacent, well, it's right next to your island, right? It's just a few hundred feet away. We have different rules. We have all sorts of illogical rules, and we come over to your island and take what we want when we want. And we have more resources and power and so forth. We want to know what your argument is against us doing that, other than you have a practical philosophy that we don't agree with.
Yeah. Yeah, I would just kind of explain it. I mean, I suppose it would depend on us agreeing that logical fallacies are bad and we should use as few of them as possible. That would be my reasoning. I would try to convince the other island that if you identify a logical fallacy, then you shouldn't be using it unless absolutely necessary. So that would be my logic to kind of argue with them. If you know what I mean.
Yeah. So how do we know if it's absolutely necessary? You know what I mean? Like, because when like I'm saying, I'm pointing out that in the domain of ethics and morality, the subjectivist is inevitably going to move to logical fallacies in some fashion. That's sort of a personal theory, which I was trying to point out to you just then, and we can explore it more in the future. So I'm going to find you committing logical fallacies, and you're going to say, well, in my worldview, that's okay, just as little as possible. So we want to know how you came to that determination and which ones are okay. Because if you're speaking of subjective morals and the other island says, well, we have a similar philosophy, but we don't limit our logical fallacies, and you can't ethically disprove us because you have subjective ethics. See what I mean?
Yeah.
It'll frustrate you to be next to the island that says, well, we commit as many as we want to out of utility to take from you. You're like, that's not right. And they say to you, well, what's right? It's just what you guys decided, and it's what we decided. We have more resources and more will to steal from you, so we win. That's frustrating for one,
Yeah. I mean, again, getting back to the practicality bit, I mean, it's frustrating, but it doesn't make it not true. I mean,
you're bringing in truth now. Like, the subjective idea is that there's no truth to the matter. It's just
no, I'm not saying there's no truth. I'm just saying what if that's. I mean, you're never going to convince everyone to agree with you. I think it ultimately comes down to agreement. Like, we agree that we both have logical fallacies. You start with God, which is circular, which is a logical fallacy. I start with laws of logic, which is circular, which is a fallacy. So we agree there. But you're saying, what if one island has a philosophy and it's different to you? I mean, you can try to convince them, but you might just not be able to, and that's just the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do?
Well, the thing is you're trying to convince them of what you can't even really convince yourself of. That's kind of more the point. Like, you're like, they're wrong, because they allow for logical fallacies and they steal from us. But then if you really are consistent with your own philosophy, you're like, well, they actually aren't wrong. They're just winning.
No, I think you're forgetting my belief that you should have as few logical fallacies as possible. Obviously, they don't believe that. But you're saying I can't convince myself of that, but I am convinced of that. I am convinced that you should have as few logical fallacies.
Right, but you're also convinced that you just made that up. That you just determined that. You're not convinced that that's a true reality. That's an objective reality. You see, you're not convinced
because I don't agree that like there is objective morality. That's what I'm saying.
That's the whole point. Is that so you're ultimately challenged. You're not even convinced yourself. You're just saying, well, it's my opinion from experience that I'm right, although I know that deep down I'm not actually objectively right, because there is no objective right. So you hold that belief, and then you have the adjacent island who perpetrates you and steals from you. Holding a belief like that in a way justifies what they're doing, because you accept that there's no objective true morality. So they win. They're winning that game that you're playing. I would say it's a game you're playing coming from my world.
Yeah. Okay, so what about the youth pro dilemma? Because I think that would answer it as well.
Oh, like is that where you choose the least harm in a situation?
No, the youth pro is like you're saying. There's objective morality, and it comes from God.
Right.
But did God choose the objective morality, which would make
the same answer? It's the same answer as the answer before with the sovereignty and the transcendent knowledge of God. I don't have access to that information. It's speculation.
So you're saying you don't know? You believe there is objective morality, but you're just saying God is sovereign, and beyond that, I don't know why.
Well, I assumed the question you were going to ask me, and I might have cut you off. So you can ask it in its entirety, and I'll see if I give you a different answer. That might have been my fault.
No, it's fine. So you just I was asking, does God choose what is objectively moral, or does it? Are there facts in the universe that are objectively moral? And you're just saying, I don't really know how it works.
Yeah, either way it would have been God's doing. So I guess, you see what I mean? Like either way that it happened, whether or not I can access that understanding, it would have been God's doing. The point is that it would be objective either way. The foundation is what's key. Like when I was telling you about the other island, and I was showing you that when you trace it back, you say, no, I'm convinced that well-being is the answer. And I said, but you're not really convinced, because you're just convinced that that's what you think it is subjectively. So deep down, you hold a belief that you don't even hold a fundamental core strength to. You think it's actually just a fabrication. So when they do overtake you, there's a bit of powerlessness there. I don't know if you ever thought of it that way. Like you don't hold to objective belief. Like when you have a child in danger, you say, well, certain things happen, or you say, no, there's certain things I know are wrong in my heart of hearts that I will never allow happen to a child. I don't care what anyone else is doing. There's a difference there. There's a fundamental difference there in core ethics.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that could still be subjective. That's just I owe the child's life. I mean that doesn't whether it's subjective or because someone else could not care about. I mean, people have sacrificed children in the past. You know what I mean? So obviously,
it doesn't necessarily matter what people have done. You know what I mean? Like you say, like, oh, like I think I've asked you before, like, okay, so like raping an innocent child may not be wrong in all cases. It's kind of a dark question to ask a subjective moralist, but they can't really argue it. They say, well, I don't know, right?
Yeah.
it might be right in some cases. To hold that core belief, I think is
But then
human condition.
Then you would have to give an argument why it would be right in a given case. Do you know what I mean? If you're making a statement that it's not wrong in all cases, then you would have to justify that with giving a reason why it would be right.
And that's a burden that you hold. That's the point of the dark exercise. Like, that's actually a burden that you hold.
Yeah, but I'm not.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's weird.
But it's worth exploring on your own time, because when you start thinking in those directions, you can find things that you can go, you know what? This is not ever going to be right. It never was. It never is. It never will be. That's how I started to get into objective morality. Even before I got into the faith, I started to convince myself that there were things that would never be right. Now I know you're thinking that from your worldview, it's just in my subjective mind and so forth. But just consider that for what it's worth down the road at some point. Like, do that exercise that we just brought up. Make a case for it and see where it goes.
Yeah. Cool. Well, that I think will be a good point to end it on. I've got to take a nap. So.
Yeah, man, great conversation. I'm glad you came in. I'm digging the new Wild Heart here, man.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks a lot.
Good work, bro.
Yeah, good to see you again, and everyone inside chat. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Take care, brother. Oh, that was a good one.
Mm-hmm.